All right, welcome to After Dinner Conversations, After Dinner Conversation. I'm your host, Drew Rhodes, and today we have a very special guest with us. I made some notes. If you like Victorian Gothic literature, if you like dark fairy tales, fantastic metaphorical examinations of the psyche, and all things fae, you are going to love our next guest. She is so many people's favorite Substacker. I'm not even joking. I was talking to my older brother, who I didn't even know knew anything about Substack, and I was telling him that today I'm going to be interviewing this person, and he was like, "What, really?" He flipped out about it. He was so excited, and I didn't even know that he knew anything about Substack. She is the author of The Labyrinth of Broken Mirrors, as well as the House of Bones, and many, many other stories and poems. Please welcome to the podcast, Labyrinthia Mythweaver. Labyrinthia, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Is this pointed at me, right? Okay. Okay, so why don't you tell us, we'll start off talking about The Labyrinth of Broken Mirrors. Tell us what it's about.
So The Labyrinth of Broken Mirrors is a novella that explores I don't know if you're familiar with internal family systems therapy, but it's basically the different parts of the self. So in this story, a young woman, Wisteria Thorne, has returned to her home where her mother has passed away. And in her grief, she has, a difficult time and ends up entering this magical labyrinth. It's very much a kind of Alice in Wonderland descent, but as you go along, it becomes apparent that each monster she encounters is actually a part of her psyche that she needs to integrate.
Interesting. And I was actually going to save this question for later, but since you mentioned the monsters, I thought it was really interesting how in your kind of description of this in the introduction, you describe the monsters as exiles, protectors, firefighters, parts that carry pain, fear, memory, or rage, the parts that learn to guard the pain by becoming sharp, frightening, or impossible to ignore. You said that this story is not about slaying monsters or escaping the labyrinth. It's about understanding why these structures exist, what they protect, and what it means to move through them without violence towards oneself. Why is that important to not demonize these monsters, and so to speak?
I think it's important because we all have them. Some people had a harder upbringing than others, and those parts are more assertive and more aggressive. But that doesn't mean that everyone doesn't carry some sort of shadow self. And as long as we refuse to acknowledge it and hold it in shame, that part is going to kind of hijack us under stress. And then we end up doing things that perhaps our higher self would not have chosen to do.
Oh, yeah.
But once you understand kind of the mechanisms and why it's there, no matter what that part may, it may have some narcissistic leanings, or it may, see people as objects to be used. And that doesn't mean that person always sees things that way. Just in a survival moment, they kind of jump into that mindset. So once they understand that, when those moments come up, they can kind of assess it and be like, hey, look, I know that this is our mechanism that we like to use to get our control back, but we don't need to do that this time.
Yeah.
So it gives you a lot more control. And once you kind of release that shame, you're able to love yourself. Or you can appreciate that part is trying to help you instead of trying to frighten people or frighten you.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now, talk about the sort of inspiration for this book. Obviously, there's a lot of therapeutic elements of it. There's the Alice in Wonderland parts. I'm picking up notes of some Jungian psychology as well. Talk about what inspired you to write this book.
It was very much a personal journey for me. When my father passed away, I had a really, really difficult time. He had been very mentally ill, and that wasn't something I was able to acknowledge or talk about for basically my entire young life. Like we just pretended it
Mm.
wasn't so. So once he passed, I I don't know, my whole kind of structured identity fell apart. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, I need to like start from the ground up and figure this out. So I discovered parts of myself. And in a lot of ways, it, it's not me, but it's archetypal rep of
Yeah.
my part.
Yeah, it's like a allegorical kind of
Yes.
version of the things that you have been struggling with.
Right. And as I integrated those parts, which is still a work in progress, obviously,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
as I started to integrate those parts and understand what they were and what they were for, it really helped me to process that by putting them into story because I, I really believe in the power of myth and allegory and just archetype in general that it's basically like a little it's like a zip file, right, of
Mhm.
like the greatest knowledge we have, like the archetype of the
Oh yeah.
trickster, the archetype of, and I feel like it's such a great way to really thoroughly process it in a way that feels familiar to everyone,
I like
because
that.
everyone knows those archetypes, and that's where it's very Jungian. Because
Yeah.
I don't agree with Jung on everything, but I do really think he was on something with universal consciousness and archetypes being our way of understanding
Oh yeah,
humanity
yeah.
and consciousness.
Definitely he definitely has a lot of really interesting ideas. What is your like background with mental health and psychology and everything like that? Like, have you like studied it like officially, or are you more like a just interested in it as a hobbyist or as a writer?
Very interested as a hobbyist. So my actual background, I have a history degree and I have a law degree. I'm an attorney.
Oh,
Um, and so research and parsing through information and data is very easy for me. That's a skill I already had. And when I became interested in understanding myself, I did a lot of that research independently and very hyper focusedly. And so I learned a lot, took in a lot. And then it became very much an interest in try to help other people. I've known so many people in my life that have a similar, almost like dissociative structure to
mhm.
to themselves, and I feel like once they kind of see the labyrinth, it might not be a labyrinth for them. Maybe it's a haunted house or whatever,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
they feel their psyche looks like, but it gives them uh, just kind of like a map to start exploring that. Like that's their work to do, but it kind
Mhm.
of shows how you can map yourself.
Okay.
And I've been, I have, so I have an app that I want to develop.
I was
Um,
gonna actually ask you about that, but let's start talking about it.
sure, it's called Aletheia,
Hmm.
which means truth in Greek, and more specifically, like uncovering hidden truths, which I
Yeah, like
think.
bringing out of hiding or an
Mhm,
ongoing dynamic reveal of reality is my favorite way that I heard it
exactly.
described.
Yeah, it's a wonderful word.
Hmm.
Um, the Mythos engine, and the idea behind this app is to kind of give tools to anyone to be able to create their own labyrinth of selves. Of course, it wouldn't need to be a labyrinth or anything like that, but it's guided journaling. It does use like AI to keep things healthy and directed.
Hmm.
And it kind of guides you through discovering your parts and mapping them, but it doesn't push you into anything. I've done a fair amount of the background work for it, and it's, I'm phrase it, but too much going.
I think it sounds really interesting. So you described it on your Substack as a space where people might map their own inner labyrinth through story and reflection, which I thought sounded really cool. It's actually so. It's actually one of the things that I thought was really cool about it was it's actually really similar to something that I've been thinking about doing myself. Not an app per se, but so I had a very similar experience where instead of actually mapping out my traumas and the things that I've been through fantasy and reality, I actually went and like literally wrote every single story that I could think of from my childhood, and it took me about 3 years to do. But then afterwards, I was like, I wanted to create a sort of kind of guide to where people could use journaling and storytelling and stuff like that to sort of get the same sort of results that I got through that therapeutic process. So when I saw that you were doing something really similar, I thought that was really cool that we were kind of on the same wavelength as that.
Well, I absolutely love that. That's wonderful to hear. I really think narrative therapy is horribly underused for how powerful it really is. And I don't know that therapists are really trained how to, they'll tell you to journal. But they don't walk you through like what kind of journaling actually can help with that self-discovery a lot of the time.
Exactly. So when I was going through, like, I kind of hit like a rock bottom and I wanted to figure out like how I got there. So I decided I was going to create like a roadmap, for how I got there, like all my mistakes that led to this big mistake. And when I was going through it, I was like, this has got to be a kind of therapy. Like this is so effective. And I was looking around and I couldn't find anything, because I was like, man, I'd like to find somebody that would help guide me through this process. But yeah, you really can't find anything like that out there. There are some people that advertise narrative exposure therapy, but it's not really the same as like writing it out yourself. It's like it's like you talking to the therapist and the therapist writes it out. And it's like, I don't think that would be as effective as a person writing it out themselves. But that's actually one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is like writing as a form of therapy, because I think that's something that we both have in common. So you talked about your father's passing and the sort of things that you were never able to acknowledge as being part of that. But like, what was the thinking specifically behind, okay, I've got this problem that I need to work out, and I think writing is the best way to do it? Like, what got you there?
Writing has always been a pretty powerful tool in my toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I had some early traumas with diaries and journaling where they were read without my consent, and there was I had a lot of internalized distrust of writing down personal things. And like I said, I hadn't been allowed to talk about a lot of life, so there was a lot kind of trapped inside.
Yeah. And
when my father passed, there was this realization of like, he's not going to go through my writings anymore. I can write anything I want. No one will care. And that was a very freeing moment. And it took me a long time to kind of unravel all these things that I had kept from myself for such a long time. Mm-hmm. But writing was always there. It was always something. And I think some people do, like, there are going to be people, if Aletheia gets created, that are drawn to it because writing has always been kind of part of how they process. And I think verbal processing is big for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. One thing I think is kind of cool with narrative and, whether you're telling like a memoir or a story, is that you can actually get some somatic work done, mm-hmm. depending on how you write it and, the series of emotions that you go through. And as someone who is very disconnected from my body, I'm kind of a floating head most of the time, mm-hmm. being inside that story helped me to do the kind of somatic processing I needed to move on from. And I suspect that would work for other people, but that's theoretical. I don't know.
I think that it would. I think there's so many different benefits towards using writing as a form of therapy. And, like whether it's narrative or journaling or memoir or whatever, for me, there was a great, one of the great therapeutic benefits of it was just being able to inhabit the feelings and emotions that I wasn't able to inhabit at the time. Sometimes it was like a reframing of a story where like I had heard someone else's version of my own life so often that I started to believe it. And then when I told the story myself, and I had rules that I had to follow that I kind of developed as I was doing this. Like one of the things, kind of like very similar to your monsters policy, not policy, but was that I couldn't demonize anyone, not even myself,
Yes.
And so I had to like recognize the humanity of everyone. And as I was going through these stories, I would be like, wait a second, like that's not what happened, like, or whatever. So I think that like reframing of a lot of these stories is also really beneficial in the telling of it, like being able to inhabit yourself and being able to reframe things and really make it your story and not something that just happened to you.
Absolutely. I agree completely with that. Very, very.
So kind of along those lines, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in one of your responses to the written questions, which will be down below here, is you said that I think writers are too often different part, sorry. You said, I'm interested in the idea that people are not singular, coherent beings, but ecosystems of competing desires, masks, wounds, and narratives. Like, could you tell me more about that? Because that kind of goes along with that therapeutic aspect as well.
Absolutely. I do very much believe that it goes along with the parts work and the idea of, you have parts that are protectors. You have parts that are going to come out when you're in crisis, the firefighters. You have exiled parts, which are the hardest to access, ones that live in a place of shame, that are not allowed to come out by all those other parts. And as you go through life, I mean, you don't really realize it unless you have, dissociative identity disorder or something where you're present. But for all of us, those parts are kind of negotiating between themselves on who's going to handle a given situation.
Yeah.
And I find that just incredibly fascinating. And it allows, once you start to really understand those different parts, it allows for so much more compassion towards other people, because a lot of times when when you have that gut feeling that you just like really dislike someone, it's like, no, I know that person's terrible. That's usually a part that's exiled for us, that's fronting for them, that we're like, I'm so ashamed of this, it can't exist, and they're embodying it, and your body just like reacts to that, like, no, this is not good. And there might be reasons for that.
Do you have any tips for people for accessing those exiled parts of them?
I mean, for me personally, the writing, and I do fiction more than journaling just because I have all, the reasons why that is the case. But that's very much how I discovered it. Like, I literally was writing the Labyrinth and went in, and, the first chapter, basically the embodiments of black and white thinking. There's, one that's kind of like a perfectionist and but is very kind but overgives, and then there's the other one that's very harsh but very honest and very true, right? And so it was kind of where I started, and as I went along, I started thinking about what other methods of problem solving and responses that I had to different things, and then each one became their own area. There's another one, the Watcher, that's like hypervigilance and surveillance. And I don't know, they just kind of came to me as I was imagining walking through my brain. And it was like, oh yeah, I got to come up with something for, this coping mechanism. And then it just turned into story. And I don't know that would work for everyone, but I do think once you discover a couple of parts, you start to see them so much in yourself and in others when they come forward.
I get that. One of the ways, no, I probably shouldn't say that on air. I was going to tell you how one of the ways that I accessed my exiled parts, and that was by writing under the influence.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely can help. I think anything that allows you to access parts of your brain that maybe are closed off.
It was one of those things where I noticed that, and not like heavily or anything, but it was one of those things where I noticed that when I would write, like completely stone cold sober, I would kind of like allude to the darker parts, right? But if I had like, say, like a little bit of an edible in me or something, I'd be like, let's unpack this, you know? And I'd turn something that was like that much of a paragraph into like 15 pages where like I fully unpacked it. And then once I'd fully unpacked it, it was like, oh man, like I feel light, you know, like I feel good, you know?
Right. It feels so good because really you're writing from that part when you do that. Like I have, one of my poems that I think you've read, the Feral Love poem, is very much from like my exiled kind of like borderline-y attachment problem. Exile that I came to know really well. Like I became very comfortable with that part, and it no longer causes me disruptions in my life because of that. So now I can kind of access it freely and be able to, without any shame. It's like, yeah, this is what I'm thinking. It's not what I'm doing.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And the parts so much feel safer because they're not being locked away in shame, right? Like,
yeah, totally
accepted.
Yeah, I get it. So I wanted to follow up on another answer to your question. So you said that you usually begin with an emotional image or an atmosphere rather than an argument. What was the emotional image or atmosphere that you first imagined with Labyrinth of Mirrors?
The house.
Or Labyrinth of Broken Mirrors, sorry.
I envisioned this like old decaying Victorian house. And for me, that was, it's a symbolic space. And I think in a lot of ways, haunted houses are symbolic spaces, right? Like Gothic literature is able to explore the psyche very, very deeply just through haunted houses anyway. But for me, there was an additional layer because my father, whose death I was processing, loved Victorian architecture. Like he would take me to tour all of these different houses, you know, all across like the Midwest when I was a kid. And so I have all of these memories of those spaces with him and, you know, everything that went along with my childhood. So for me, it was creating like my childhood home and this archetypal haunted that held, you know, secrets and pain, and accessing, you know, that relational aspect. And then I just kind of started writing it. Like once I had that all in my head, just kind of like poured out of me because it was the things I needed to say about that, and it was just the right setting to do it.
I like that. So you talked about your childhood and going to like touring Victorian homes and stuff. One of the things that I noticed in your work is this sort of balance of this kind of like childlike innocence and playfulness with like a very mature kind of darkness, you know? How do you juggle those two things, and where does that come from?
I mean, that really is just me. Especially as I've integrated more of my parts, I realize how, like, I feel like I'm always referencing liminal this or the liminal that, but that's because I feel like I exist always between like extreme dark and like childish whimsy and wonder, and they exist at the same time all the time. And there is a balance to writing that I feel like that I sometimes have to sit and be like, am I pulling in one direction or another too far, where it stops being believable. But I think it's very true to the human experience. Mine might be a little more extreme, but
I appreciate that, because I've always felt like I guess sandwiched in between two extremes as well, but mine's more been like between this sort of like poetic, wise, kind of sage-like thing and being a complete buffoon, which was when I was a clown, my name was the Philosopher for a reason. Yeah. It didn't catch on, but yeah.
Terrible taste, those. The philosophers
right?
have been very successful.
And before that, I was Ennui the Poetry Clown, which is another juxtaposition of things. So yeah. Okay, let's see here. Okay, we got about 10 minutes left. Zoom is asking me to upgrade. Never! So you say that beneath all your work is the question, what does it mean to survive becoming yourself? What does it mean to survive becoming yourself? Like, have you figured it out yet?
And I keep trying to answer. In all of my work, honestly, I really do try to address that question. Most recently, the one that comes to mind is The Borrowed Daughters, which is the kind of changeling tale where two girls go off to fairyland and come back changed. And each one was written to represent a different coping mechanism. So it's really, it's going back to like the Labyrinth of Broken Mirrors, where like these represent parts, but it's told in a very like classical fairy tale way. And I remember when I was writing that, it's one of the least hopeful of my stories. It's one that really lets you sit with the idea that sometimes you've just become this thing, and unless you have some huge outside force, you're just going to be this thing. And that, like, I always want the Labyrinth of Broken Mirrors is written as a story of integrating your entire self and happy ending for the most part. But it can be very difficult to access those parts as well. It can even be dangerous, especially if you have a history of extreme trauma and your exiles are suffice it to say that sometimes I don't think it's necessarily wise to go poking in there, because you're protecting yourself for a reason.
I get that.
And that makes it complicated. And the question of, can you be your whole self without knowing your whole self? There's so many questions there that I don't really have the answers to, and that I'm always trying to kind of explore, both for myself, but more generally for humanity, because we all understood ourselves in that so much of the hate in this world would just dissipate, because you develop this intense compassion once you start having compassion for all the parts of yourself.
I totally agree with that. And I've actually found that in myself as I've done a lot of work and written out my stories and stuff. Like, it not only increased my compassion for myself, which I didn't realize that I didn't have until for a while, but it also increased my compassion for other people, because I'm like like you see a homeless person on the street and you go like, that could have very easily been me if my family hadn't have gotten my back when I had that big crash out or whatever, So I wanted to ask you about your use of AI, because I thought it was a really interesting how you described it. So you described your use as AI as an external hard drive for your brain, and you described it as Ariadne, which of course is the princess that helped guide Theseus through the labyrinth in Crete, and who later went on to marry Dionysus. Could you tell me more about that?
Sure. A lot of my inner work was facilitated through AI. And I
Hmm.
think, I am neurodivergent. I think AI has a way of bringing me back to pieces that
To
maybe
what?
got,
You cut out
uh,
for a second.
oh, sorry, to pieces of information that I may kind of block from myself. I have a
Mhm.
lot of dissociation,
Yeah.
and there are definitely times I can access certain thoughts and times I can't. So, in a lot of ways, having AI hold on to all of my thoughts, especially regarding psychology and philosophy, I've been able to develop this view a lot more clearly than I think I would have if I was kind of swimming in my own thoughts. It allows me to kind of follow a path that I think my thoughts wanted to take, but they
Mhm.
easily get distracted, and AI
Yeah.
helps.
So,
And I mean, it's the same with writing. Like, I don't,
mhm.
AI doesn't write for me, but AI can help me kind of distill what I'm trying to say when my thoughts are scattered.
So it's kind of like it's like a bit of a organizational system in a kind of way.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and that it holds a lot of the thoughts and information that I'm thinking about at a given time so that I can take all of that together later. And, a lot of times I do have a lot of layered themes and
Hmm.
things that are just a lot easier with that help.
It makes sense. Makes sense. Um, okay, so before we go, obviously you're a lot of people's favorite Substacker. Who are some of your favorite Substackers? Substackers that you might want to call out and recommend to any of our viewers out there?
Sure. Well, I'll start with when I first started on Substack, um, I was very interested in horror, and John Watson and Shay Morgendorffer were the first accounts that really drew my attention, and I learned so much from them. I started writing short pieces of fiction that I had never really done before, like the microfiction or the
Hmm.
flash. And so, all credit there for like a good portion of my stories that came out because they were completely inspired by them.
Yeah.
Wonderful writers, and very prolific. They both have huge archives. Um, and then, oh, who else? Marble and Ember. I love her work.
Marble and Ember.
Marble and Ember. If you have not read her, you should. Her
I'd check
work
her
is
out.
also gothic and psychological,
Hmm.
and it's fantastic. I mean, very, very. She gets right to the heart of things. Connor McCormick.
Hmm.
We both have a love of history, and I love that he like deep dives into history and philosophy really within his work. Um, the in between, I know I know Mila mentioned me
Mila's
as well.
great. Yeah.
I really admire just, she's so prolific. She has just the ability to take on any genre.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and that I think is absolutely incredible to be able to do that.
Yeah, that
So
was
I
one of
always
the things
enjoy
that we
her work.
talked a lot about when she was on here. Just amazing range.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm always looking to kind of expand outside of that. But at the same time, my Substack is very much about that kind of gothic psychological.
And you do it
Doesn't
like
have to be
really
horror.
well too. Like you really paint a picture with words with your writing. Like you create such good ambiance,
Thank you.
And not a lot of people can do that. I can't do that. That's not my strong suit. Um, uh, 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 okay, well, we should probably wrap this up. So, Labyrinthia Mythweaver is the pen name of author Catherine Chodor, a writer of gothic psychological fiction, modern folklore, and mythic horror. Her work explores liminal spaces between fantasy and psychology, blending surreal imagery with themes of trauma, identity, and transformation. She publishes fiction and experimental multimedia here on Substack, where you can find her at Tales from the Labyrinth. And you can also find us, After Dinner Conversation, at After Dinner Conversation. And our magazine is on stands everywhere right now, so go and check that out. I've been your host, Drew Rhodes, Labyrinthia. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.